Now we are on. Welcome back. Welcome back to this series in preparation to the third annual EECOLE Roundtable that will take place in Jakarta at AREA, the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. We are thrilled to continue our conversation that are, in a sense, preparation towards the discussion we're going to have in a couple of weeks' time. And we are very happy to have with us today Professor Andrés Rodríguez-Pose to discuss about AI and places. What are the differences? What are the similarities between Europe and China in particular? But let's start the conversation immediately. So let me give the floor to Raffaele, who will introduce Andrés, and then we will kick in the conversation. Over to you, Raffaele.
Thank you, Giulia. Good afternoon, everybody. Raffaele Trapasso from the OECD. Let me introduce someone that I really cherish, and I think I'm very glad that we can connect today with Andrés Rodríguez-Pose, Princesa de Asturias Chair and Professor of Economic Geography at the London School of Economics. Andrés' research work on economic geography, the geography of discontent, some glimpse on the geography of higher education. Thank you, Andrés. You are at the roots of this work that we are trying to develop. And today, topic, new research activities on the regional uptake of the AI and its connection to economic performance. Let me start immediately, jump on the first question. Your research explores the nexus between AI and regional development, and in particular, how regional features influence the uptake of AI in both China and Europe. Could you give us an overview of your findings and also about the definition, so predictive generative AI, and data that you used? Thank you, Andrés. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Raffaele, and thank you very much, Giulia, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you, talking about this topic. And well, AI is a fundamental revolution that is happening right now. It's a massive technological breakthrough that is going to have significant implications on jobs, on growth, on productivity, on all sorts of activities that are happening across the world. And the views are mixed, like with any sort of technological revolution and massive breakthroughs. There are some of those that say, well, this is fantastic. This is going to change the way we work, and on aggregate is going to generate much more opportunities and is going to actually allow to generate greater economic growth, more employment, and improve productivity in a way that is not the old way. It's much more, let's say, sustainable, much more inclusive in a certain way. However, this view seems to be in a minority, and most of the research that's taking place is focusing on AI and jobs. And the perception there is fundamentally that AI is going to come and take our jobs. That in general, what we're going to see is that the more we go into an AI revolution, AI is going to replace jobs that are not just at the bottom of the skill ladder, but are also increasingly, because of the capacity of AI and all types of different types of AI, to substitute for not just routine activities. We're going to see middle class, middle skilled, and even high skilled, even some creative jobs disappear in the short term, creating significant problems and significant havoc. Having said that, most of the analysis that has taken place has been fundamentally an analysis that has been done at the national level, if at all. So most research until now, whether it's, let's say, people like Daron Acemoglu, the recent Nobel Prize winner, or David Autor, or a host of other people coming from not just economics, but also sociology, political science, are focusing on this from a national level. And there was this gap that AI adoption varies enormously within our countries, depending on the level of specialization, the type of firms, the economic structure that we have at subnational level. And this is the research that I've been conducting with my team, fundamentally with Eugene Roux, who's at the University of Leuven in Belgium, on how AI is first generated and adopted across different regions in countries. And we have been looking so far fundamentally at the case of Europe and at the case of China. What we do is we make a distinction between AI, on the one hand, AI generation, so the capacity of different places to generate AI, which is at the moment, it seems that China is clearly at the forefront relative to Europe, that Europe has probably missed the train or the boat in that respect. And on the other hand, whether that generation and the AI adoption, the capacity of firms and individuals to actually adopt AI for the tasks they conduct, and as a result of that, to move to a different stage. And we have been asking two fundamental questions. The first one is the big question: is AI good or bad for us, at least in the short term? Is AI generating more jobs in aggregate? Is it generating greater economic growth? And is it generating improvements of productivity? And the second question is, what are the implications? Who are the winners and the losers? And since I am an economic geographer, most of my focus has been on territories. Are there specific areas of Europe and China that are going to benefit? Or are we going to see, let's say, more losses and more areas that are going to be critically affected in a negative way and losing in the short term? And we make this distinction that I mentioned before between AI generation and AI adoption. At the moment, we've been focusing, because of problems of data, on AI generation in the case of Europe and AI adoption in the case of China, as we have more specific data on adoption in China, and we're trying to look at for Europe at the moment is not proving very successful. So what do we find? Let's take a look at the first case, which is AI generation. First question, is AI good for growth, jobs, and productivity? And the answer is across the board so far, yes. That on aggregate, the generation of AI, that places of Europe that have produced more AI, in this case patents, actually on aggregate do better in terms of economic growth, in terms of job and employment generation, and in terms of increases on productivity. So in that respect, the results are overall positive. What about AI adoption, which we mainly look at the case of China? Is pursuing AI and adopting it at the level of firms, at the level of, let's say, local governments, at the level of also individuals, leading to more economic growth? And the answer here is, again, yes. Places that have made a bigger bet in terms of AI are seeing significant increases in terms of economic growth relative to places that are lagging behind in terms of AI adoption. So in that respect, the first question seems to be that AI, whether it is generation or adoption, is good across the board and on aggregate. Of course, the problem is that AI affects different people, different firms, and different territories in different ways. So we are trying to see who wins and who loses in this respect, and seeing whether AI is a good tool for reducing the territorial divide that is pervasive both in China and in Europe, and whether it is better to go for AI generation or AI adoption in those terms. So what do we find? Well, in the case of Europe, what we find is that on the whole, there are benefits across the board in terms of GDP per capita growth, employment, and productivity growth simply for AI generation, but it varies enormously. If we just look at the impact on economic growth, it is positive, but the relationship accrues as we move up the AI generation scale. So regions that are not generating any AI or virtually none, which are those at the bottom 10% percentile of let's say the AI generation scale, those that are not generating patterns or very few patterns, are actually growing very, very little. And that there is an increase as we move up the scale, and most of the benefits accrue to all those regions that are in the top half of the AI generation scale. In terms of employment growth, the impact is smaller in general. So is the of our three dimensions, GDP growth, GDP per capita growth, employment growth, and productivity growth, the one that on aggregate we see the lowest effect, but we see a far more even distribution across the board. So that those limited gains that we find are distributed more or less evenly, whether you are in areas that are not providing or not generating AI, or in areas that are at the top of the generation of AI. And finally, when we look at productivity, what we find is that there's a massive concentration of growth in productivity in the regions that are in the top 2 deciles of AI generation. We see no effect from the lower decile to the regions that are in the 70th percent of the distribution. And then what we see is a massive jump, and with a significant increase, especially in those regions that are at the top 10% of the generation of AI, which happen to be actually concentrated in the case of Europe, mostly across the south of Germany and central Germany, and some points elsewhere in fundamentally the Netherlands. And that's about it. So that's the situation about AI generation. Good across the board, but on the whole, with the exception of employment, leading to a rise in the, let's say, territorial divide. What about AI adoption, which is this analysis we have done so far in China? So are places where you have a lot of firms and individuals using AI actually doing better? Are they catching up, and who benefits? So as I said before, I think in terms of AI adoption, we see significant positive benefits in the same dimension. We're looking here just at growth of GDP, and they are across the board. So in aggregate, AI adoption is also positively associated with economic growth. But when we look at where these benefits accrue the most in terms of adoption, we find that we have almost, it's not perfect by any means, but I use an inverted U-shaped distribution, an omega type of distribution, where the biggest returns accrue to those regions that are located in the 50th around the 50th percentile of AI adoption, so right in the middle of the scale of AI adoption. And there's much lower levels of adoption, despite everything being positive, at the bottom end between 0 and 10%, and at the top end between normally 90 and 100%. So in that respect, what we see is that the main benefits actually takes place in those regions located between the 30th and the 80th percentile, right in the middle of the distribution. What we've done in this case is also we have combined AI adoption with other measures, traditional measures of innovation, like, for example, investment in science and technology in the case of China, and this reinforces our results. The regions that combine more investments in science and technology with a bigger, let's say, share of AI adoption are actually those that are growing the most, and the biggest benefits accrue to those that are at the middle of the distribution, in this case between the 40th and the 60th percentile, meaning that it's right in the middle where you see the biggest benefits. So in this respect, AI adoption seems to be a big factor for catching up in the regions that are in the middle, reducing the territorial gap, with the only exception that it does leave those regions really at the bottom of the distribution behind. But it's a great opportunity opportunity for the majority of regions and the firms located in those regions to actually catch up and reduce the gap with the most advanced firms and the most advanced regions.
Thank you very much, Andrés. Extremely interesting. Now let's continue our conversation to understand the relationship between AI and places, and let's focus a little bit on skills. Skills and the different levels of skills in different places are likely to play a major role in productivity, economic growth, and in relation to AI adoption. So what can you tell us? What is emerging from your research? What types of skills are critical for AI adoption? And also, is it just digital skills, or maybe we need the skill sets that go beyond that? Over to you, Andrés.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Julia. Here, there's a need to do much more research. But of course, there are two advantages and disadvantages in AI and skills, and many of those are really located or connected to the whole dimension of whether we're looking at AI generation and AI adoption. So in terms of AI generation, what we find is that there's the firms that are at the forefront of generating breakthroughs in AI need very specific skills that are not found in abundance, that are, let's say, demand a huge amount of training, and therefore can only find in a relatively few limited number of individuals. So they are very, very difficult to generate, and they're very difficult to dominate, especially if you want to be at the forefront of making this breakthrough. So it's not that in most places in the world you're going to find those skills in abundance, and as a result, they're going to become increasingly concentrated. These are individuals with a huge level of human capital that are going to command significant returns in the labor market, and are probably going to gravitate, because they are very often young and therefore mobile, to places where you already have the needs, where you have the capacity to generate that AI, therefore contributing to talent rate. That's the one. Having said that, when we look to the other side, which is the level of AI adoption, one of the great advantages of AI relative to a lot of other past technologies is that on the one hand, you require for the adoption of AI and AI breakthroughs relatively limited amount of physical capital, and you require human capital, but this human capital is not necessarily a capital that has to be highly specialized. Of course, it depends on what type of AI you're going to adopt, but if I can use AI on my daily, let's say, work these days, not knowing anything about AI about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and I can use it without any specific training to actually benefit in terms of, for example, the coding that I do, increasing my productivity massively. It means, and there's not just anecdotal evidence, there's critical evidence that AI can be adopted by individuals, by firms at relatively low costs with skills that are not necessarily just digital skills, but are generic skills that in some cases facilitate creativity. If you're using language models, the question is not how good you are with using your computer, but how good you are at making queries to actually when you're interacting with AI. So in that respect, what the advantage is that relative to past, let's say, technological revolutions, where the level of human capital was much higher, you can do significant transformations in terms of having general skills, but using much greater levels of creativity. So the barriers to entry tend to be smaller, and that might explain why, let's say, places and firms located in, let's say, areas that are adopting AI in a moderate way, that are also at medium levels of development, are getting more benefits and greater returns than if you're closer to the technological frontier where you are already working at the border in that respect. So we have these two situations where, on the one hand, unfortunately, because of the demand of skills, AI generation is likely to concentrate even more in a few firms, in a few places, but AI adoption provides a far more democratic tool to improve change and transformation within our existing firms, and therefore to generate more opportunities with more generalistic type of skills than in previous technological revolutions.
Thank you very much, Andres. This is super interesting because there is actually a double-sided AI narrative now about this. And as you said, your research indicates that the middle-income regions benefit the most from AI adoption, while lagging regions face more challenges. Now, in terms of policies, what policy interventions or strategies do you believe could help lagging regions catch up? And what role can communities and local governments play in this process? And I would welcome any specific comments that you have about intervention for SMEs. Thank you, Andres.
Okay, thank you very much, Raffaele. I think that's a very important question. My first suggestion in terms of policy implementation is that there's a need to bet on AI. What we have is that across many firms, many organizations, many territories, we have this debate still about whether AI is good or bad, whether AI is going to actually take our jobs, and whether we should limit and restrict AI. Well, beyond the ethical dimension of AI, places and firms cannot really afford to bypass the AI revolution. We're in the 21st century, and we cannot just live and work and operate as we were in the 20th century. We cannot be Luddites that try to destroy the machine, like in the 19th century, with a difficulty that you cannot find the machine anywhere, because if you destroy your computer, you will be destroying your hardware, but not the software, which is the AI. So there's a need to convince firms and administrations to make a bet on AI. And the results seem to be going in that direction. Whether it is AI generation or adoption, then you should bet on AI. The second policy recommendation is, once you decide that AI is where you should go, so should you go for generation or should you go for adoption? I mean, if you can go for generation, you should go for AI generation. The problem is that most places that I know cannot go for AI generation. I mean, it's when you read the Draghi report, which is a significant diagnosis, in Europe, we have a significant problem, an enormous problem in terms of competitiveness. We're losing our place in the world. Productivity has not grown, not just in the last 2 decades, but possibly in the last 5 decades at all. And what we are seeing is that there's a need to go and try to emulate what is being done in China, what is being done in the US, in terms of being capable of generating AI. Fine, I mean, we can try that, but in my opinion, and I hope not that no one gets offended or this sounds too harsh, this is like when Greece, for example, tried to generate its own computer industry in the 1980s. It's an attempt that is going to be doomed to failure. So it's going to be the boat has sailed, and jumping into the water and trying to swim behind the boat is not going to do the trick. So most places, including whole continents, would be foolish to try to think that they can catch up on the AI generation revolution. What can be done is to bet on AI adoption. And AI adoption doesn't mean that you're always lagging behind, because if you use AI in those areas and in those fields where you're actually leading, you can ensure that you're not going to be able to lead. You're going to be able to guarantee that you keep your leadership position in the future, that you're not bypassed on the right and on the left by others that are using AI. But even if you're not leading, you can make sure that you can become far more productive, far more competitive, and as a result of that, survive and generate employment by adopting AI in whatever tasks that you're doing. So there's a need to make a bet in most places on AI adoption. And as we're seeing in the case of China, on combining AI adoption with more traditional, let's say, elements that are leading to innovation, like, for example, investment in research and technology, connectivity of firms to other firms in the rest of the world, and also, for example, betting on other transformations like digital transformation, automation, and robotics.
Thank you. I was not as smart as AI with all the commands. No, super interesting. Thank you very much, Andres. And this distinction between adoption and generation helps a lot us. Also, there is a the cargo cult theory, you know, this idea that in the Pacific Islands, after the end of World War II, Pacific Islands were trying to attract cargo planes by replicating airfields with coconuts and palms, and you know, but the airplanes never came back. And it reminds me all the accelerators and incubators that should specialize about AI in all regions, so that you see now everywhere, that try desperate to create a startup community of workers and skilled people about AI. And I understand it's very difficult now because this webinar was of course an EECOLE webinar about entrepreneurship, you know, and AI entrepreneurial ecosystems, but is also related to regional development. We have a colleague of us, Alex Seaman, from the Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance Division, that will open the Q&A session. Alex, if you have a question, I give you the privilege to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Raffaele, for those words. Also, thank you, Andres, for your insights on this very relevant topic that we're seeing, not only in terms of regional development, but more broadly in terms of policy making. So I would like to ask you, Andres, like in the context of AI adoption, how do you see, or how can governments leverage regional development policies to encourage collaboration and partnerships with the entrepreneurial communities and the local ecosystems? That would be my first question, and a follow-up question is how you see the collaboration between governments at all levels and the communities and the ecosystems to leverage AI for improving policymaking. So how we can use AI and bring the value and all the innovation around this technology into policymaking. Just to comment on this, well, AI, we're still like exploring how this technology can be used and leverage to improve the way that we're delivering policies. But I would like to ask, in your experience and on the evidence that you've been working on, if you've seen some interesting examples in which areas we could maybe focus those efforts. Again, many thanks for your time and your insights, and happy to follow up with the discussion.
Thank you very much, Alex. First, I need to clarify that I haven't been doing the qualitative work that you're demanding. So going into the ground and seeing to the efforts, I've just been looking so far at this phenomenon on aggregate. But one of the things that needs to be highlighted in many places, and I've been putting the emphasis on AI adoption, which is what's going to happen in terms of territorial development in most parts of the world, that adoption of AI is very, very uneven. And very often it depends on not just the incentives that are put there for the adoption by firms and by individuals, but also on the awareness that firms and individuals have on the adoption, on the use of AI. We are now 2 years into the launch of, let's say, global launch of language models in AI, and in fact, the level of adoption well, phenomenal. So ChatGPT, I think, got 100 million subscribers within a month. Within a few months later, was in 200 million, but it's still a tiny fraction of the world. And I'm not saying just one particular model of AI. There are a lot of different alternatives in terms of AI adoption. And there's a need to make sure that the incentives and also the persuasion to adopt AI at the level of the firm and at the level of the individuals is there. And it's difficult when there's still a big debate, and especially a big reluctance by many of our leaders to see AI as the evil, as this machine that is going to take our jobs. I mean, there's going to be a period of adjustment. Like in any revolution, there are going to be, of course, people that are likely to see their jobs thoroughly transform or even lose their jobs, but a lot of other jobs are going to be created. And what we are finding is that AI adoption and AI generation in general are going to be beneficial across the board in economic terms. So we need to beat that reluctance. And there's a need by international organizations like the OECD to actually beat the drum that, yes, regardless of whether you have, let's say, ethical qualms, whether you think that we're going to be dominated by robots or not, if you stay behind, what you might not have is a problem in the future. You're going to have a problem immediately in the near future, in the short term. Then second, the question is, how do you combine AI fundamentally with other models of generating innovation? Because on the whole, what AI is going to do is also to facilitate, for example, connectivity, or which is one of the factors that is fundamentally behind the drive of innovation across firms, and especially across small and medium-sized firms that very often do not have the luxury, as big firms do, to have in-house capacity to develop and use and research and development for product innovations or process innovations. And on top of that, what you'll need to do is that by using AI, what you're going to have is a much greater capacity to learn, so that your workers, your firms are going to have a much stronger, let's say, versatility to move and to develop new products and innovate that if they stay doing business as usual, they would not have. So the main stage is, let's convince decision makers that supporting AI is something that would go forward. This is what we're measuring, for example, in the case of China, where we're seeing the reports of, we're actually looking at the reports of local governments and city governments, and how much do they use AI-related words in terms of how they are using them. And what we find is massive differences between different places in China, which actually reflect the conviction of local leaders about the importance of AI and this AI revolution. And then second, you have to create the incentives and the mechanisms to make sure that firms adopt AI, but also that individuals are trained and are aware and are encouraged to use AI in their daily tasks.
Thank you very much, Andrés. I think that if I may make a comment, is that your point about linking AI to comparative advantages at the regional level, it's very important, because from our perspective, there is a specialization of the policy on AI and is mostly on generation. So everyone is going in that direction. But I think your point about promoting adoption, especially in connection with comparative advantage or competitive advantage, it's very relevant for our agenda, a part of the discussion of the horizontality of skills. There are two questions that I want to highlight together in the chat. One is about a request of one moment to better define adoption and diffusion and generation, sorry. And another question about the ethical part of AI that you mentioned is not the focus of this discussion, but is probably worth addressing.
Thank you very much, Raphael. As you said, I mean, the barriers for AI generation are phenomenal. You need a lot of, let's say, investment that is not available everywhere. You need scarce human capital that can actually be at the forefront of developing new systems. And also you need to overcome already the gap that you have between startups and more established firms. So there can be breakthroughs, there can be new sectors, new firms that might appear. And I don't say that the firms that we have, the players that we have at the moment are there. But if you need, on the one hand, a lot of investment, you need huge human capital. You need to have the know-how, and you need to have the access to talent, and you need to have the access to chips, for example, to train your systems, etc., plus energy and everything. The barriers to entry are phenomenal. So you need to bet on the actually the adoption of those systems. On the whole issue of well, the ethical dimension is beyond my area of expertise. I always believe that machines are not going to control us, that we are going to control machines, and machines would be responsive to humans. But having said that, I mean, that's a completely different dimension. At the moment, it's clear that AI responds and facilitates many of the tasks that humans are doing, and makes those easier, and makes us allowed to, on the one hand, be more capable of innovating in introducing, let's say, process innovations in routine tasks, but also allows us to liberate time to concentrate on other types of innovation and make sure that other forms of investment in innovation are far more effective. So without going into the ethical dimensions, I think there's a need, if you want to promote economic development and not be left behind, to just focus clearly on the adoption of AI.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Julia wants to add a comment or.
Yeah, but I think there are probably some more questions before we maybe move to conclusions.
I think that Salvatore Zecchini had a question.
Yes.
I asked, if you want, we can exceptionally give the floor to Salvatore, because Salvatore, please, very brief.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to type 3 questions. First, why do you think Europe cannot catch up? After all, we are talking about software development, and large companies are already generating their algorithm for generative AI. Second, evidence on productivity is not positive in many countries, at least over the short term, if considered in terms of value added per labor. And third, what do you mean by places? Are you referring to countries, regions, cities? Because there are major differences in all this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll remember the 3 questions after I make the answers. Sorry. First one, why Europe cannot catch up? Well, because the barriers to entry are very high, are exceptionally high, and they become higher with time. So now the players have become bigger. They command significant amount of, let's say, resources that come from investment, but also venture capital, etc. And Europe, as the Draghi report has in many ways painfully highlighted, is well behind on those areas. Most of the skills, and Europe can generate the skills, are already migrating to the established places, and they're becoming increasingly concentrated in certain parts. When you look at the maps of AI generation that are taking place, for example, you see in the US, or in the case of China, you see a phenomenal geographical concentration of AI generation in a few places, the usual suspects in the case of the US, both the northeastern coast and the western coast, the eastern seaboard around Shanghai, and especially in the south in Guangdong region, Guangdong province, in the case of China. And we cannot kid ourselves that increasingly, in order to be competitive, what you need is a massive amount of hardware, and you need a massive amount of energy that we're not going to get in the short term. So we're always going to be playing catch up in Europe in that respect. And I think Europe would be much better served to, rather than trying to emulate what is being done elsewhere and played follow-up, that we can use AI to do where we are leading and do it much better. So when I say for Europe, it can be anywhere else. This is one of the things that I think needs to be highlighted from the Draghi report, that is very good at looking at where the rest of the world is doing things better than us, but it doesn't look at what is the potential in Europe in which we are doing better. And we have to remember that, for example, we have examples that are world leading, like when with the vaccine that was generated by biotech. The problem was not the human capital and the technology, and it came from a medium-sized university, a medium-ranked university in the case of Germany, in Mainz. The problem was the actually production of the vaccine. We didn't have the economies of scale. The second is our capacity to lead as Europeans in certain specific drugs and diabetes, and also, for example, obesity, that has put Novo Nordisk as one of the world leaders in terms of pharmaceutical industries, or even in medium tech. We have world leaders in, let's say, apparel with Inditex from the middle of nowhere in Spain, or also in the case of IKEA coming from a small town in southern Sweden. So in that respect, if we were to apply AI in a much more systematic way to those areas and adopt AI, we will be making sure that we will have continuous capacity to excel in a lot of other sectors where AI can be applied and where we have significant potential, rather than start from scratch in a sector where we are looking at our competitors already, whether it is in the US or in China or even in the Gulf states, already just moving over the horizon. That's one. Third question, which was about what do I mean by places? What we're doing the analysis is for regions in Europe. So we're looking at NUTS2 regions. So we have about 260 regions across the whole of the European Union. And in China, we're looking at city prefectures, meaning that we have, because we don't have for the whole of the country all the data, but around 300 city region prefectures in the case of China, which are relatively small regions. And I am afraid I forgot your second question. I knew I was going to forget one. So if you can repeat it, I'll be very happy to reply.
The evidence on productivity is still controversial because as far as we see in some surveys done across companies, the impact of AI adoption over the short term has been negative and not rather positive. So whenever you say that the impact is going to be positive, you have just to add what the time frame is and with respect to which subjects, what type of companies, and so forth and so on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, the evidence is massively controversial. And it depends on who is doing the analysis, what their prejudices are, what sort of data, or whether they are doing firm level, I'm doing at territories, other people are looking at adoption by individuals, and there's a lot of discussion. So I'm not going to claim that I have the right here, or that I'm absolutely right and everyone is wrong. So in that respect, there's a lot of controversy. This is an evolving field. This is a new field. What can I say? That I've been covering in the research I do with my team now more than a decade. We start with our data in 2011, both for patenting and AI adoption in the case of China. And we finish with data in 2022. So it's not massive, but it's no longer the short term. It's not just looking at 1 or 2 years or a few cases, and we do it in a systematic way. What is it that we find? We find that in both cases, the impact on aggregate is positive, and it's far more positive on growth and employment on aggregate than it is on productivity, which was a surprise for us. We were expecting more on productivity than on employment, but also we find that the benefits on productivity also just only accrue in the case of Europe to those places that are at the highest level. Of course, we look at territories. We don't have data on firms, and it might be different from firms. But, and this is just an opinion, I'll be very skeptical that it doesn't benefit firms. If you adopt AI like any new novel technology in the short term, you're going to have perhaps adaptation and you're going to have teething problems. So that might translate, not everywhere, but in some cases, in not the expected increase in productivity and in perhaps some slight declines of productivity. The only thing is that this is a very quickly evolving technology, and the learning capacity of firms is going to improve. So I'll be very surprised if any firms that see any sort of, let's say, teething problems at the beginning don't increase their productivity and their dynamism as a result in the medium term or relatively short to medium term. And one thing I'm certainly sure, although of course it can be discussed later on, is that if you do nothing, you're not just keeping up with the rest, you're just going to be staying still. And although some firms are going to try to adopt AI and are going to fail, I would say that the biggest majority of firms, the large majority of firms that would aim to adopt AI are going to do better. And as a result of that, what we have is that non-adoption of AI is going to be a factor that would doom a lot of firms in the future.
Thank you very much, Andrés. We are above our time. It was a pleasure to be connected with you today. Thanks again for your precious time. AI is a cure for slack in firms. This was the second webinar of our mini series, paving the way to our roundtable in Jakarta. There will be a third and last webinar next week on the 18th. So we will welcome you then. And let me wish you a very good evening. And thanks again for your participation. Thank you, Andrés.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Julia.